So we have Dr. Stephen Sears from the Maine CDC, as well as several members of a new clinical work group to help inform these efforts, both these sessions and other efforts that we're going to be launching to help get the word out about the safety and efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccine. I mentioned we're planning these as really brief sessions twice a week, Tuesday mornings at 7:30 and Fridays at 12 noon, just trying to find times that fit into what we know are very busy schedules for clinicians. If those times don't work, we will certainly be happy to change that. We're planning them for the next month or two. We'll go as long as needed and certainly can wrap up once people feel comfortable. And we know there are a lot of folks looking for this education. The context, I don't think I have to say too much more, is a pandemic that is out of control. We do not have any financial interest as speakers to this, and we are offering CME. To do that, if you could put your name and your email for physicians in the chat, we'll capture that, and then we'll be working with the Maine Medical Association, who's been incredibly helpful in this effort, to grant 0.5 Category 1 hours of CME credit for each attendance. We are working from a fairly extensive curriculum to try to offer these sessions, but we'll only be obviously able to get through a bit of information each time. Our goal is to limit our formal presentation to about 15 minutes or so, and then allow questions for the rest. So we're going to try to sort of work through different areas each time. So you're certainly welcome to join as many of these sessions as you want. You will hear some repetition, and there will always be opportunities for questions. So just to start out on this before I hand it over to Steve, our real expert here, and many other experts through all of you, I will also say up front, I think we also acknowledge that we are all learning as we go. This vaccine is officially, 2 days old, and so we're all learning from the experience that's out there, from the scientists who have developed this, from all of us learning together. So I'm sure we have many of you who have studied up as well, so feel free to contribute, to jump in. Again, we have several members of our clinical work group that's helped to advise these efforts, so feel free to jump in anytime. The key first point is we know vaccines are very precious and sitting in boxes, but vaccines don't save lives, vaccinations do. We need to get them in the arms. We know that there have been a lot of questions, and we're going to try to address many of these questions as we go through this presentation and the subsequent sessions. This is just a brief outline. I mentioned of a curriculum that we've been working to develop. So there is just no way we're going to get to all of these topics today. We can't, but our goal is to do that over time. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Sears for some of the basics about immunology and the vaccine.
Great. Thank you very much, Lisa. And I do want to just emphasize what you said, is there clearly are some experts on here who know way more about these topics than I do. We're all running fast, trying to learn as much as we can. I just think the opportunity is incredible. So just to remind us, the immune system is really composed of three parts. It's got antigens, or foreign proteins and or foreign agents are often processed by macrophages. They are presented to B cells, which produce antibodies. You also then get a T cell response. And the good thing we know about this vaccine is it does appear to produce a robust both B cell and T cell response. And do I go to this next slide, Lisa, or do you do it? Let me just, I don't know that I've got control. So could we get the next slide?
It's me, Steve, and it's just acting funky for a second, so I might have to get it out of slide.
Okay.
Here we go.
Great. Okay. So one of the things that Dr. Lutano and I talked about is really, we wanted to just make sure everybody is rooted in what is the process that we have, that this vaccine has gone through, because it really is no different than other processes to produce other vaccines, except it's just been much more accelerated, but it's been done in a very objective and controlled way. So generally, when we start with a vaccine, it's given in what are called phase 1 trials, phase 2, and phase 3. Phase 1 is really mostly all safety. It's a small number of people. This is after it's already gone through some animal trials and some other studies to make sure that it's appropriate. It's given to a small number of people. If it passes that, it quickly moves into phase 2. which is a larger group, but still not particularly large number of people, but it's looked at a few different populations, and it looks both, again, at some more safety and some efficacy. But when its efficacy is really just by looking at an antibody response and saying, yeah, this looks like it might really work. The real meat of vaccine development, though, is phase 3, which are controlled clinical trials, which are generally large scale, 30,000 plus, and it is a placebo-controlled trial done for numbers like this throughout the country, trying to identify large numbers of individuals from different risk groups, as well as those who are going to be willing to join the group. So that's where we are. We can go over that again, because that is what drives the FDA process for approval. And I want to say that, people talk, they use the term FDA approval. What we have right now is what's called an emergency use authorization. It is not a full approval. It isn't the same when we sort of see a medication or vaccine that says this is FDA approved. What this is this is authorized, and it's authorized after really good scientific data. But again, if you start at the left of the slide, you'll see that, you can do some exploratory information. Preclinical data with this vaccine was done predominantly in a lot of primates. It was found to be produce a lot of a good immune response, a lot of antibodies. And I want to remind people, this started in January of last year. I mean, I think the science here is absolutely stunning, but it's not brand new. This was based off of a prior history of understanding mRNA as a delivery product and delivery mechanism for vaccines. It was then given in phase 1. The phase 1 trials said, yeah, this looks actually really pretty safe. Phase 2, there were, and I think there was a New England Journal article back then, showed, yeah, this produced a really good, robust antibody response, and some follow-up papers showed that there was a good T cell response too. We then went into the phase 3 trial, and that is what we have just seen the results from those, and those are 30 plus overall. This then went to the FDA and got an emergency use authorization. It gets that after an external review board, which is independent of the FDA. Independent scientists reviewed this, that was headed by Paul Offit, who is a well-known vaccine scientist in the country, ran that. Then they make a recommendation. If they recommend to the FDA to consider moving forward, it then has to be approved by the director of the FDA. It then has to be sent to the ACIP, which is the Academy of Immunization Practices, which again is an independent group. It is not, these are not government employees, not industry employees. These are independent scientists who then recommend approval and what populations to use this in. And this is sent to the head of the CDC, who then has to approve it. That was all done Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday of this week, with the ability then to have vaccine delivered on Monday throughout the United States. And in fact, Maine received vaccine in 2 sites yesterday, and will receive vaccine in a number of sites more. There are lots of other vaccines that are out there right now, and this just gives you a really quick sense of the numbers. But really what we're going to be talking about today are mRNA vaccines. The other groupings, because we'll see these as they come along. We're all used to an attenuated or weakened inactivated virus. We've seen that in a number of different viral products. We also have viral vector vaccines, which are non-COVID. This is the ones we're talking about mostly here are adenovirus vectors, but they essentially are a virus which is given the coronavirus genes, which then it's used as a vector. I want to mention that all of these, once you get into parts of viral vaccines like a protein or the mRNA or the viral vectors, they are all trying to deliver to us the spike protein, which, if you recall, on the outside of the coronavirus is the important part that binds to our cells. It's the important part which then allows uptake, and that vaccine is, that protein, that spike protein, seems to be one of the key antigens for us to develop antibodies. And if we do develop antibodies against spike, it prevents it from binding to our cells, which therefore prevents infection. And that's really what almost all of these vaccines are trying to do. But right now we have the Pfizer vaccine, which is an mRNA vaccine. This is in the bottom part of this slide. Don't The top part is about DNA vaccines. We don't have those available at this time. They're being worked on. But the mRNA vaccine is really, it's not a brand new vaccine. It's actually been used in some prototype Zika vaccines. Some have been developed for Ebola. It has been used to work for um, anti-cancer therapies in the past. So this is what we have now is actually the result of 10 years or more of science developing to this point. Is it the first time we've had this as an actual vaccine candidate? Yes. But as I want to really emphasize, it's based on a lot of science that's come in the past. So how does it work? Basically they take the spike protein genes from coronavirus, put it into some mRNA. It's a very small piece. That was done relatively quickly because the technology had been developed. The problem with mRNA left on its own is it degrades very quickly. And so you have to put something around it to make it safer. So you put what's called a nanoparticle, which is a liposomal type of material, which protects it so it can go into our cell. It is then taken up by our cell and goes to the ribosome. The ribosome then produces, with this mRNA, the spike protein, which is then exuded into it's both on the surface of the cell, but it's also mostly in the cytoplasm. And we recognize this as a foreign invader, and we produce an immune response to it, and we develop robust immune responses to spike protein, which again is the area of the coronavirus which binds to our cells, causing disease. So we've all seen this picture of a coronavirus, and there's the spike protein. It's those little tufts overall. Those are really important, and if we can block those, we can prevent infection most of the time. So what do they do? They take a lipid nanoparticle, they put the mRNA in it, they give it to us in a intramuscular shot, and then the rest of this starts in process. The FDA did provide an EUA, emergency use authorization, on the 13th, and the rest of those processes were developed. The mRNA vaccine takes advantage of our own ability to make proteins with ribosomes. It is not an unknown technology. It is a vaccine that enters the cell, but it doesn't go into the nucleus. It does not affect our DNA in any way at all. It is not live. It doesn't cause in any way cause COVID. It is really a small piece of genetic material that we use in our own mechanism to produce the spike protein. Looking at the trials that were done, this is the Pfizer trial. Did it work? Yeah. See here, and this is, I think the important point is that it takes a lot, even though there's lots and lots of COVID going around, when you do a controlled trial, you don't know if people are going to be getting infected, and you want them to still use masks. You want them to do all the protection. You don't tell them to go out and, go get infected. But some do. And this clearly showed that the percentage of people who received placebo, easy for me to say, was so much greater than what was in those with the vaccine. And that comes out to a vaccine efficacy, which is a calculated formula, of about 95% for this vaccine, which is extremely good. It's actually extraordinary. But does it have some side effects? Yeah, none of these are long-term serious side effects. These are short-term, but they're very real. There is associated pain. Clearly, you get pain at the injection site. There's some fatigue, and you can see the numbers. There's headache. There's some muscle pains, chills, joint pain. and a small number, 10% or 15% or so with fever. But generally what I would say with this, you get this, you're going to have a really sore arm. You're going to feel kind of really achy and cruddy for a day or two. And it all goes away. And that is the good side of that is that's probably the immune response going to town, helping to produce a robust immune response. It looks a little bit like this is a 2-dose vaccine. It is given 3 weeks apart. Looks like the second dose may have a slightly higher rate of side effects, and it looks like individuals under the age of 55 may have a slightly higher rate of side effects than those over 55 to 65. Who's going to get it? Well, I'm sure you've heard lots of different news articles, but most of the talk and the decision making has decided that healthcare workers are number one, because healthcare workers, specifically those in direct patient care settings, are likely to be exposed and need to be protected, and we need to protect them now. The second group are those vulnerable individuals in our society who are at the highest risk of morbidity and mortality, and those are long-term care residents. And that's what we call phase 1A. Phase 1B, and that's what's going on right now. And so we will be working over the next probably 3 to 4 weeks to try to get as many of those individuals vaccinated if possible. We receive vaccine this week. We will receive vaccine next week. We will, assuming that the same process goes into play for the Moderna vaccine, we'll receive Moderna vaccine next week. And all of this will be put together to try to get through phase 1A. Once phase 1A is relatively complete, we'll move to the essential workers, which includes a number of people you can see on this slide, but those people who help keep our society going. And when we get to phase 1C, we're going to be looking at those individuals with high-risk medical conditions and adults over 65, because we know those are the ones who have, when infected with COVID, tend to have a worse outcome.
So Steve, thank you. I'm going to just jump in here to say that there's so much more we could talk about. Vaccine hesitancy and trust, we know, is a giant issue, and we're going to just need to go more into this over time. We did want to focus this first session, as Steve just very well has, on issues of vaccine development and safety and some of the specifics of this first Pfizer vaccine. We do have a larger slide set that we will post to the Maine CDC COVID vaccine website, where we've included a whole bunch of resources. USCDC has been coming out with some great presentations and information as well. Got our contact info here. So again, we'll share this, but we wanted to switch over to questions. I am sure that, what am I hearing? Just gonna get out of screen share here. That there are more questions than we are probably going to be able to answer in this one. So Amy, you've been monitoring the chat. I couldn't see it when we were on screen share. So are there any that you're seeing come up most frequently, excuse me?
There's a lot of questions around the priority system and how that's being determined and how people can give input to the state around distribution to make sure that groups are taken care of that potentially are high risk. So I don't know, Lisa, if you want to talk about that piece.
Well, I think there's a lot TBD, and Steve and others feel free to jump in. So, I believe the recommendations really come from ACIP first, that slide that Steve just showed, but then there's so much sub-prioritization within that, right? So category 1A, healthcare workers, we started in the state by allocating first to hospitals to get frontline ICU, ED, critical care, and COVID units. But then there are thousands and thousands more healthcare workers. So that process will continue. Discussions and recommendations out of Maine CDC, DHHS, the governor's office. But there's just going to have to be some prioritization and waiting, unfortunately. I don't know, Steve or others, if you want to say more about that.
No, I would also say that there are other sessions that occur, which there's a work group, which the vaccine immunization part of CDC provides. That a lot of the logistics of the delivery, who's going to get it, et cetera, are discussed at that in that situation. But I mean, I see a lot of questions sort of floating by about don't forget about this group, don't forget about, and what I want to say is every single group is being considered. We're moving as fast as we can, and private practices will clearly be within the discussions and the decision making. At the present, there's really a limited amount of vaccine to start with. I suspect within about 3 weeks, we're really going to start seeing that expand. And I think that if there is a website where you can send in your comments to the vaccine, the immunization group, and it's a vaccine, and we'll get it for you. It's I used to have it on a sticky on my desk, but they cleaned my desk. It's but it's the vaccine branch of Maine CDC, and they have their own website, and you can actually see the COVID plan on that website.
I'll do
It's a
share
question
screen
that-
for a second while we
Yeah.
show that, just to show people and in the last slide of my PowerPoint, I had the resources.
Right.
It has a link to that, but I'm just going to show that for a second.
That would be great.
That is
Thank
the
you.
CDC, the Maine CDC vaccine provider portal website, and there's different links here for communications as well. Probably that email is on there somewhere.
So there's a question around the pregnant healthcare workers. So there are some
Sure.
slides from the past ACIP presentation this weekend and from the federal CDC. And the recommendation for pregnant healthcare workers is that they do it in consultation with their healthcare providers and talk with them, but they are included. So when their group comes up, they are allowed to take the vaccine under the EUA. And so it was also a very nice article in the New York Times going through different recommendations from ACOG and different groups around pregnant healthcare workers that's out there as well, but they are included under the EUA to be able to get the vaccine.
Happy
Yeah,
to
just
provide
gonna,
some context on that.
I'm just going to do just one slight housekeeping thing because folks joined after. We are awarding 0.5 category 1 CME credit. So if folks are physicians and want a CME credit, just to put your name and email into the chat. Folks have seen that, but I'm sorry, who was jumping in behind that?
Just, I'm happy to provide some context on the pregnancy question, if you'd like.
Yes, that'd be great.
So, you know, in the long history of vaccine development,
And
there
Cheryl,
has
can you
been
just introduce yourself so folks know?
Sorry, hi, I'm Cheryl Lichty. I'm an infectious disease doc in Rockport, also with a sort of background in public health as well. The question about pregnancy is a great one because unfortunately in the long history of vaccine development, pregnant and lactating women have routinely been excluded from trials. And that, despite some advocacy, continued in terms of the COVID-19 vaccine development. So although there were some incident pregnancies during the trial, they otherwise didn't include pregnant women. This led to kind of an outcry, especially in the past few weeks as the EUAs were anticipated. And quite a few experts in the field, including a number of pregnant academic physicians, by the way, really advocated hard for the EUA not to exclude pregnant women because there is very little biologic plausibility for safety concerns. Again, as Steve Sears pointed out, this is not a live vaccine, and really it's only live attenuated vaccines that we avoid in pregnancy, nor does this get incorporated into your genetic makeup. So the EUA specifically mentioned that pregnancy is not a contraindication. And as was mentioned a second ago, ACOG in particular has released an excellent statement about this topic. And that's easily available online, or someone can include the link in the chat. It's a really nice discussion of all the considerations around pregnancy and this vaccine. And I would encourage folks to take a look at that. We don't, you know, the answer may be different for different people, but I think that reference in particular is a great read.
And I just did a little screen share of, there was a USCDC webinar on Sunday, what every clinician should know. And I just did a screen share. There's also links again in our presentation to that as well. I also saw one that comes up often about who should not get this in terms of anaphylactic reactions. There's been much made of the anaphylactic reactions from people in the UK. I don't know if Steve or Cheryl want to take that, and if folks aren't talking, if you can mute, or Amy, mute all our speakers, we'll just have to unmute.
Yeah,
You
I'll find a couple.
Steve may want to add to this too.
You have to just unmute again, Cheryl. I had to mute all for background, sorry.
So Steve may want to add to this too, but a couple things. One, it's still not clear what happened to those two individuals in the UK on the first day. In other words, it's not clear that these were true anaphylactic reactions, and there was a lot of skepticism about that because it would have been expected to appear in the 40,000 plus trial before that, which it did not. And in the US, in the EUA and the CDC guidance, I believe, it's not a contraindication to this vaccine, but there has been a recommendation to extend the monitoring period to 30 minutes. And I think the slide just had that. The standard monitoring period initially right now is 15 minutes with a recommendation to extend it to 30 minutes if there is a patient with any history of anaphylaxis. And I think that, those of you who are familiar with vaccine administration are familiar with some of the issues around observation times. I think it's fairly likely that this observation time makes a lot of sense in the EUA phase, and assuming no surprises is likely to kind of fall by the wayside as we get more towards an FDA approval status.
Yeah,
So I just wanted to point out on this last slide that absolute contraindication is only if somebody has an allergic reaction to that vaccine.
Right. One of the things I saw the question come by, Lisa, and I know it's asked a lot, which is what if someone's had COVID? And the recommendations are, even if someone's had COVID, they should actually be considered for vaccination. We don't know that the COVID illness itself gives complete protection. There were a number of individuals who had COVID in the trials. And so unless someone has active disease at the time, then it would not be recommended. But otherwise, that should not be an issue.
So Steve, can I actually ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
So some institutions, for example, UCSF, in their FAQ for employees on the vaccine, one of the questions is, what should I do if I've had COVID? And I was very interested in the answer, which is, well, there's a lot of data suggesting that you are protected at least for 3 months after COVID, that reinfection during that interval, of course, is very rare. So please consider passing your place in line for now and giving other people a chance to get the vaccine while it's still scarce. Do you, from a state public health agency perspective, have any opinion on that type of answer from an employer?
Yeah, I've seen that answer. I'm just what I've seen from the federal CDC is that this at this point they're not making that recommendation. They're recommending that people who have had COVID in the past, if they are in the high risk priorities, to go ahead and get the vaccine. We also know that reinfection is one of those things that we're still learning about, because the CDC is now studying people between day 45 and 89, because there appears to be the potential for probably a few more breakthroughs in secondary infections, especially in elderly nursing home type individuals. And so especially in that population, I think having had COVID is probably not something. I do understand the resource allocation question, but the federal CDC has not really weighed in. They've said anybody who's had it should be considered for vaccination.
And with that, we are magically at the end of our half an hour. We debated about doing these as 30-minute versus 60. We just know everybody's so busy. We thought we'd have repeated 30s, but it goes by quickly. So we may rethink that.
It made me feel like I had to talk really fast.
Cross between you and me, Steve. So thanks everybody for joining. We will be back on again both this Friday at noon, and then each Tuesday at 7:30 a.m. and Friday at noon for the next several weeks at least. This session has been recorded. People have asked that. We will be posting that and these slides and USCDC slides to the Maine CDC website. We will do our best to communicate. If folks have emails for Steve, me, and Amy, feel free to let us know if there's something specific that you need. But obviously, we've had actually close to, I think we had 450 something, so a little hard to get everybody. We really appreciate everybody's time and effort. And thank you all for the work that you're doing. Stay safe and feel free to join again next time around. Thanks so much. I'm going to stop recording, and as soon as I copy all the